250 years ago, a war was just starting. A war that was going to change history for the United States, for Great Britain, for France, and for other countries around the world. 13 very distinct, very different colonies came together. They had a different culture, each one of them. Sometimes they had different currencies, different ideas about freedom or governance, but they came together to separate themselves from Great Britain at the time. This was a very unequal kind of war going on here. The 13 colonies, they had 2.5 million population or so, and a very small agrarian economy. Versus Great Britain, 8 million people, 5 times or 6 times bigger economy, and an industrial base to go with it. Arguably the most powerful military force in the world at the time. And here these colonies want to separate themselves, and they want to use a war to do it? This was a huge undertaking. Ken Burns has a new documentary called The American Revolution. It's on PBS now, and it's the kind of documentary that if you like what we're doing here on this channel, you will love that. Make sure to check it out. The Continental Congress gave George Washington the job of being commander-in-chief in June of 1775. Immediately, he had to figure out where he was going to come up with the men to build an army. He would have to figure out how to clothe them, how to arm them, where is the ammunition going to come from, how are you going to transport them, how are you going to keep them healthy, where are all the leaders going to come from? Huge questions, very difficult to answer questions. Today we're going to be looking at just probably the smallest one. How do we clothe this army? Where are we going to get the uniforms? What are they going to look like? How do we keep shoes on our soldiers? One of the big challenges was the cost of outfitting these soldiers. A typical British soldier in the 18th century, his full kit for a year would cost the amount of money that somebody might make an entire year. So it's very, very expensive. Clothing in the 18th century was a lot more expensive than clothing today, and a military outfit is complex and has a lot of different parts to it. A military uniform has to do many different things for the soldier. Number one, he wants to look impressive. It needs to also be very, very serviceable. It needs to be sturdy, he needs to be able to march, it needs to keep him warm in the winter. There are a lot of different components to an outfit. George Washington, when he needs to outfit this entire army, he needs to meet those same criteria. How can he have an impressive uniform? How can it be sturdy and easy to use and keep his men warm and be inexpensive enough for this brand new country to afford? So let's start at the top of a soldier in this time period. He's probably going to be wearing a cocked hat or a tricorn hat made of fur felt. Even today, a fur felt hat is an expensive hat. And they're very easy to ruin in the rain or to get lost and trampled on. A delicate piece of headgear. I don't know why they chose that, but that was the typical hat of the time period. They also have on a neck stock over the top of their shirt. And underneath, there is the regular linen shirt, a very full-bodied shirt that goes all the way down almost to your knees. Over the top of this shirt is a vest or a waistcoat, probably made of white wool or white linen. And underneath that, we have knee breeches. Yes, knee breeches, probably not the best kind of leg gear to put on a soldier, but that's what they were using in the 18th century. If we've got pants that only go down to the knee, we have to have knee length or longer stockings or hose that the soldiers had to wear. Very easy to get dirty, to get ripped. And then leather shoes underneath that with buckles. Now this outfit, I mean, it can be impressive, but it is expensive. It's difficult to keep looking good. And some of these pieces just do not hold up. Even if we make them with modern methods, they don't hold up very well. And in the 18th century, keeping them together was very difficult. So a standard soldier, say a soldier in Great Britain, he might be issued 4 pair of shoes in a year, 4 pair of stockings, 2 pair of breeches, a number of shirts, maybe 4 shirts, maybe more than 1 coat in a year because they wear out. This was a lot of equipment, a lot of a clothing that you have to keep supplying to the troops over and over again. The Revolutionary War soldier's coat is definitely the most expensive individual piece to come up with. It's made of a heavy wool fabric. It's got multiple pewter buttons on it. Each and every button is fairly expensive in the time period. It's lined with linen. It's not easy to put together. It's a heavy garment. And this was one of the biggest challenges for George Washington, especially early on. And it wasn't less than 30 days after he was assigned this commander-in-chief role that he is already having certain troops that are basically naked on the field. They have almost no equipment whatsoever. And he talks to the Continental Congress and he says, you know what we need? We need hunting frocks. 10,000 hunting frocks to help clothe the army. And this garment, the hunting frock, is an amazing little story that's happening here in basically the middle of the 18th century up into about 1812. The hunting shirt is a civilian garment. It says certain things though. It's got a message that goes with it in the time period. It says resilience, it says frontier, it says homemade and homespun. And that is a kind of a message that he's trying to send to people, that if we basically uniform our men in hunting shirts, it will not only fill the role of a very expensive coat with a fairly inexpensive garment, and it's got the message behind it. We are individuals and we are rough and ready. This is a garment that does end up being used by multiple units all throughout the war. Never necessarily as their standard garment, but sometimes certainly a fill-in. We can't get coats, let's use a hunting frock. Or sometimes there are times when the hunting frock is used as a sort of a fatigue garment. We don't necessarily want, if it's really hot out or we don't want to mess up our beautiful coats, we might wear our hunting shirt or our hunting frock instead of that. It was so sort of encouraged that there was one officer that got in trouble. He got court-martialed for wearing a hunting shirt when he should be wearing his uniform coat. And he was asked during the trial, do you not have a regular uniform coat? And he did, but he was wearing this when, as an officer, he should be showing his true colors. So the hunting frock really has this kind of interesting fill-in role. Soon after George Washington's encouragement to Congress about getting these hunting shirts, they do order a lot of tow linen to make hunting frocks out of. And this is the least expensive, roughest, readiest kind of material to work with. So the hunting frocks were fairly inexpensive. Still a little more expensive than I would expect, only about a third of the cost of a regimental coat in the time period, but still easy to get a hold of instead of the hard to get a hold of coats. So who's making all these outfits for this brand new army? That's a really good question, and it was a very difficult one to answer. There were multiple different kind of contractors. Some of these items were being gotten from overseas, specifically the French and other people were creating uniforms and shipping them over. But for the most part, they're being made by people here in America. Now, some pieces are specifically being made as a cottage industry by women, and we have some records in the time period of women specifically making knapsacks or haversacks or even rolling cartridges for the army. So everybody who is capable is trying to fill the needs of the army, whether it's a blacksmith making arms or it's just everybody in their homes weaving up the linen for these garments or sewing them together. That's not the only way some of these items are made though. There are times when the fabric itself is being sent to the unit and regimental tailors are putting these things together. So a regimental tailor is somebody who came into the army as a regular soldier, but he already had tailoring skills. And so the officer says, wait a minute, you have tailoring skills? You're going to be repairing some of our equipment, or you're going to be making the coats or shirts or whatever it is. And not only that, but that was encouraged at times to get a much better fit. So there's a record of the clothier general, the person who's in charge of all these uniforms underneath George Washington. And he's complaining that the officers aren't assigning the proper sizes to the men, that they're just sort of handing them out and they're not paying any attention. And he mentions the idea that he gets things in 3 sizes. So we find out that basically they order 3 sizes, it has to fit everyone. Small, medium, large. Let's hope it fits you. The next most difficult clothing item were probably the shoes that the soldiers had. And shoes are nothing like shoes today. Very ill-fitting, they were straight-lasted, so the lefts and rights are the same. They were made completely out of leather, and they were very difficult to make and very difficult to maintain. A pair of shoes in the time period undoubtedly will not last you an entire year. And for a soldier's duty, getting your shoes wet, marching in wet shoes, drying them by the fire, this shortens the life of shoes incredibly. So there was a lot of problem with supplying shoes. And who is making shoes in America in the 18th century? There were shoe factories and lots of shoemakers, and sometimes, just like their regimental tailor, there might be somebody in the regiment who can repair shoes or make shoes. But the soldiers are constantly complaining about not having any shoes, their shoes ill-fitting, or them wearing out almost immediately. Even George Washington was talking about some of the shoes that they had recently been issued. They didn't last even an entire day. They just fell apart immediately. I can't imagine how disheartening it would be to have an entire shipment of shoes, you hand them out to your men, and they just immediately just fall apart. But that's what was happening. There was a general, he was talking about marching down south. It was so hot, the road was so hot that it was baking the shoes, and leather shoes really need to keep some moisture. They would just crack and break. And then the soldiers had to march barefoot on very, very hot ground. So this was basically a constant issue. And we have those stories, those sort of, made up, oh, there's tracks of blood in the snow. Those aren't made up stories. That was happening in the Revolutionary War. They did not have enough shoes, and that's what happens. You get men who have very, very damaged feet almost immediately. I'm not sure what that does to, well, I know what it does to the morale of men if you don't have anything to wear on your feet. The third most complained about item that the soldiers had were blankets. They were issued a blanket. That was their only bedding. It's all they had, and blankets were in extremely short supply. The blankets that they did have were often very small, and Congress was trying to come up with blankets everywhere, so you never knew exactly what kind of blanket was going to be issued. The descriptions are all over the place, but most of the blankets were so small that they complained that they had to sew 2 together just to make one to cover a particular soldier. And there were times when there was only maybe 1 blanket for 5 or 6 guys. So this was a problem that was perennial all through the war. Even carrying the blanket was an issue. They would have to roll up all their extra items into the blanket and carry it on their back, possibly along with a knapsack or other items. Can you imagine sleeping without a blanket in the winter? I can't, and yet many of the soldiers were in that kind of a situation. It's one thing to look at the letters and correspondence of George Washington or the orders from Congress or different officers talking about the equipment and trying to get it for the soldiers. But it's another thing to look into the letters and memoirs and the journals of the soldiers during the time period. And they certainly paint a grim picture. No shoes, no coat, no blanket, they're cold, they're starving. That is what life was like for a soldier during the Revolutionary War, at least part of the time. Maybe there were times when they had all that they needed, but they knew those times of difficulty were right around the corner. These men continued to fight, they continued to do their duty, they continued to do their job, and I find that truly inspiring. I really want to thank PBS for supporting what we do here on the channel, and particularly this video. They have a new documentary by Ken Burns called The American Revolution. It's streaming on the PBS app now.